Hi, my name is Aaron Doherty, and I'm the interim executive director here at the 1699 Winslow House. And I'm going to be showing you a couple of highlights of the house and the grounds and the structure, and invite you to come along with me. Like I said, watch your step over here. You're now standing in the oldest part of the house. This was a 17th century structure that we think may have been from the original Winslow estate in Marshfield. It goes all the way back to the mid-1600s. And when the house was being modernized sometime in the mid-18th century, this structure was moved over here and was used as a summer kitchen. When it's extremely hot like it is today, it was sort of an uncomfortable place to be. There's a lot of fire, there's a lot of water being heated up and a lot of meals being cooked in this fireplace over here. So what the servants and the slaves of the Winslows would do is close up the main door into the house. They would open up these side doors, which would provide a cross breeze for ventilation, and this is where all that heat would be contained while the rest of the house would remain relatively cool. You're going to notice when we go into the main part of the house, there's a pretty clear divide between the nicer parts towards the front and the working parts of the house where we are right now. The Winslows themselves would have been in the front, and their slaves and servants would have been here in the back. This is the winter kitchen, and when the house was first built, this was the place where all the cooking was actually done. Winter kitchen, you could have 5 or 6 pots in the fire right over here, and like I said, a lot of water being heated for cleaning, a lot of food being prepared for the sake of the family and the servants who worked here. But this is really only a place that you want to have a hot fire going in the winter when the entire house needs to be heated. As soon as you start a fire in here, the bricks start to absorb the heat, and this heat is going to start to radiate through all the surrounding rooms. And as we go through the house, you're going to notice that there's a pretty clear transition from the early colonial architecture out here in the summer kitchen to the early 1700s in here, slightly later on in the 1700s in the next room, the Great Hall, Georgian period in the parlor, and then the later 1700s, the Revolutionary period upstairs. One of the reasons that we know the approximate age of the house is this very distinctive painting pattern up here on the ceiling. I don't know if you can see that or not. But this was a style that was really popular at the turn of the 18th century. And based on this paint, which is original to the house's construction, we're fairly positive that the house was constructed anywhere between 1699 and the early 1710s. Once again, there's a divide between the front of the house and the back. The Winslow servants would have used these rear staircases here and another rear staircase in the summer kitchen to get up and down the stairs. If you're carrying a pot of water or something like that, this is the way that they would have accessed these side rooms. A lot of work would have been done in the workroom over here, carding wool, preparing thread, getting all these things ready for carrying out the duties of the house. And it could also be used as a secondary bedroom. There's an old-fashioned Murphy bed right over here. It's not what they called it back then, but served the same purpose. Over here in the Great Hall, once you step over the threshold, you're leaving the work section of the house behind. This is where the Winslows themselves would have been living. And it's a lot more elegant. House at this time would have had nice furniture, nice dishes, nice cutlery, all this good stuff. And the fireplaces would have been used only for illumination and for warmth. No cooking would have been done in this room. The Winslows would have sat down by themselves if they were alone, or with guests if they were entertaining. Servants would have brought in food from the kitchen and served them, and then retired back into the working section of the house. Up on the walls here, we have some of the Winslow descendants. Edward Winslow, the Mayflower passenger, one of the pilgrims, and the only pilgrim that we actually have an image for, that we know about. He was the first Winslow in New England, in Massachusetts. His son Josiah, right back here behind you, Josiah is governor of the Plymouth colony during King Philip's War in the 1670s. Josiah is going to get married to Penelope, Pelham, in the 1650s, and the two of them together are going to have a child named Isaac. Isaac is the one who first builds this house anywhere from 1699 to the 1710s. In this room, you open up this door and you can see how much it's changed from the appearance of the house in this area into the early colonial period right back there. There's wallpaper, plaster up on the walls instead of the exposed beams. You have actual paneling on the walls themselves. You have Delftware tile here. This is expensive stuff that would have been brought over from Holland. The most important thing about the house itself is you move through and you get a sense of what this structure would have been like from the early colonial period right up until the Revolutionary War, the early Republic, and we like to talk about the lives of the people who would have lived here. Now, we're still in the front of the house, meaning we're still in the part of the house that was set aside for the Winslow family, and you can tell by the decorations in here. Once again, there's wallpaper, there's that nice Delft tile over on the fireplace. A lot of the furniture is a bit finer made. Decorations like this netting over the bed here. And this is representative of what the house would have looked like during the Revolutionary period, specifically in the summer. In the summer, when it's hot, the windows would have all been open. You would have had mosquito netting over the bed to try to keep the bugs away from you while you were sleeping. You would have had all sorts of fine furniture and fine things to show that you had a little bit more power and influence and money in the early Massachusetts colony. The man who owned the house in this period is a loyalist. His name is Isaac Winslow. He's the son of General John Winslow, and he's famous mostly for starting the process of inoculating Marshfield citizens against the smallpox virus. Because of that, and because the life of a colonial doctor it's very hard. There's a lot of midnight trips to go out and ease other people's suffering, deliver babies, and try to save people from death, different things like that. Dr. Isaac is actually very popular with the people of Marshfield. So while other loyalists in Marshfield, like Nathaniel Ray Thomas, one of the richest men in town, while they're going to be removed from the colony and their property confiscated, Dr. Isaac is going to remain here well after the Revolutionary War. He's going to die in the just before the 1820s, and it's at this time that the house begins the process of moving out of the family. But he's going to remain here for a good 30, 40 years after the Revolution, after most of his loyalist neighbors had already been forced to flee. Back in the colonial period, it was very common for people to have a little access passage right next to the fireplace that would give them access to the back of the fireplace to go and start doing repairs on the brickwork. Every single one of these passages, and a lot of these colonial houses, they're all in the same place. But during the colonial revival period, when people are starting to get back into the themes and the styles of the Revolutionary period, they start finding these passages. They didn't know exactly what they were for, and so this legend grew up that a lot of these secret passages are for hiding from Indians, or in the case of the Loyalists, hiding from the local patriots, the rebels in their communities. But if it's a secret passage, if every house has it in the exact same spot, it's not all that secret. And that's what these passages were for. It was to provide like a maintenance shaft to the back of the chimney. For the rest of the room in here, we've decorated it to look like a winter bed chamber of the period. There's a lot of heavy drapes over the side of the bed, heavy curtains over the windows to try to block out the cold air. There would have been carpets and rugs that would have run from one side of the house to the other. You would have had bed warming pans right here that you would pass underneath the sheets of a bed to try to warm the sheets before you get in at night. And it's Massachusetts. It's the 18th century. It's cold. A lot of this would have been necessary just to keep yourself warm at night, because for all the fireplaces and all the wood that you have in a very thickly forested part of the world like this, you really wouldn't want to have a fire going all night. As soon as it starts to get dark, when your family goes to sleep, you bank the fire over with ash, and with luck, that fire, the coals are still going to be hot the next morning. You can go and start it back up again. But overnight, you need to keep yourself warm in whatever way you can. Now, by the early 1800s, the Winslows no longer owned this place by the 1830s. And a lot of the items in this room were from the early 1800s, the Webster period. And the bedchamber here would have been used for the Winslow children. Still towards the front of the house, but as children were lower in stature than their families, than their parents, their room isn't quite as nice as the front rooms, the two bedchambers up towards the front of the house. Now, it's important to point out that during the colonial period, the Winslows themselves probably wouldn't have been doing much to raise their own children. That would have been left to the servants and slaves of the house, who had a chamber right back here. Before the house was modernized, this chamber wouldn't have been here. We're right over the top of the summer kitchen right now. And originally, the three servants that Isaac Winslow, the builder of the house, the three servants that he owned, probably would have slept in little garrets up at the attic. When the house has some additional rooms added on, this chamber is built here, and we think it probably would have been a bedchamber for the use by the Winslow's servants and slaves. One of the most famous of the Winslow's servants is a guy by the name of Britton Hammond. Britton Hammond had a very adventurous life. He leaves Marshfield in the 1740s to go on a trading voyage down to the Caribbean. While he's down there, all his shipmates are going to be attacked and killed by natives of the Caribbean. Britton Hammond is the only survivor. Then he's going to be rescued from the natives by Spanish from the nearby colony of Havana down in Cuba. For several years, he's going to be alternately the prisoner and then the guest of the Spanish governor. Finally, he's going to manage to escape, talk his way onto an English ship bound back for England. Once he gets over to England, or gets close to it, there's an engagement with the French privateer. Britton Hammond is going to be wounded, and he's going to serve about a month in the Greenwich Naval Hospital, just recuperating from his wounds. After that, he's going to serve in several different capacities in several English ships. Eventually, he's going to book himself passage by offering his services as a cook for a ship bound back towards the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And when he's still in London preparing for the voyage, he starts hearing all these rumors of this guy who's coming on board the ship, this General Winslow. Now, his master, when he had left Massachusetts 13 years earlier, was General John Winslow, who we knew from the parlor downstairs. And the reason people are talking about John Winslow is because he's engaged to go on the ship back over towards Boston. Britton Hammond is reunited with his master after an absence of about 13 years. The trading voyage was originally supposed to take about a year, and by this point General Winslow had basically given his old servant up for dead. And the reunion between these two is a very strange one. It's very complex, because the fact that General Winslow allowed Britton Hammond to leave for that space of time in the first place, it implies that there was a certain closeness between the two of them. But at the same time, Britton Hammond is the property of this other man. And yet in his memoirs, Britton Hammond writes that now that I'm going back to Massachusetts, I'm delivered from captivity and I'm returning back to my home. And I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it gives you the impression that we do not know how to interpret slavery, not today, because the fact that he's talking about being under captivity for the last 13 years when he was in effect a free man, and he's going back to a small room like this, did he actually mean it, or was he just saying this? Was he just writing his thoughts down so that later on people would read this and understand that while he had been gone for these 13 years, maybe it wasn't entirely of his own choosing? It's a very interesting story, and there are pamphlets that you can read about it if you're interested. And if you guys are ready, we can go right downstairs. And we arrive back where we started. One thing I want to point out, the thing that we like to emphasize about this house is it's the social history, it's the architectural history, it's the way that you get the chance to move through 120 plus years of Massachusetts history. It's a period of time that you don't really hear a lot about. The way that these people lived, the way that the Winslows lived and their servants, it's it's very different, obviously, than what we're accustomed to today. And by coming here to the Winslow House, people who are interested in family history, or social history, or architectural history, or history of any kind, they have the opportunity to go through and look at this place and see a building that's been almost completely unchanged ever since the Winslow Association acquired it almost a century ago. The only modernizations we have are smoke detectors and dehumidifiers and devices that we need to monitor and preserve the conditions in this place. But beyond that, people can come and they can hear about whatever type of history they like.